of the night, the roaring night. Today's games to create this world, reaching its long hand to the sky, it coursed its will into its blade, and made.
If you've been anywhere near the Deltarune community since either chapter dropped, you'd know that one of the most discussed topics within the fandom has been the Roaring Knight, the assumed main antagonist of the game who's been responsible for opening the dark fountains across Hometown, along with their identity. From what I've seen though, some of the discussion feels a bit reachy at times. I think some people are expecting some crazy reveal that needs 4D chess analysis to figure out, when, to me at least, it makes more sense to analyze it from the angle of what we know regarding Deltarune's overarching story and character arcs. These kind of things don't usually come out of nowhere, and Toby's narratives are no slouch in being well structured and detailed. Given that the next 2 chapters are set to come out pretty soon, I figured I'd throw my hat into the ring before we're given the next chapter of the story, and, very likely, the answer. I've taken a good look at the story, characters, and evidence from a narrative perspective, and arrived at a conclusion. 2 candidates, or more aptly, 2 branches that I could see the identity of the knight taking. Let's move on to the main event. My main picks for the knight's identity, starting with a candidate that I find slightly less likely. Mayor Holiday. Or Des. I'll explain. Before anything else, I'll go over exactly who Mayor Holiday is, for anyone unaware. From what we've been given thus far, we know she's Noelle's mom and the mayor of Hometown. She's responsible for organizing the festival coming up later in the week that's been mentioned by multiple characters. She's noted by Alphys to be single-handedly responsible for effectively eliminating most crime in Hometown, being described as having an icy demeanor and being a general workaholic. We can infer that the mayor is specifically Noelle's mom from dialogue regarding the mayor and Noelle's mom in general. We know that the mayor is Chris's neighbor from dialogue with Alphys, with Noelle's house being right next to Chris's. The wet-nosed bandits said that they were attacked by something merciless when they tried to sneak into that big house over the holidays, with the only big house in Hometown being the Holiday Estate. This sort of strict demeanor lines up with what we've heard about both the mayor and Noelle's mom. Rudy mentions that she's rather hard on Noelle, and Noelle mentions that she doesn't like being bothered at work. Similarly, the mayor is described as being hard to get a hold of, that she doesn't like being bothered while she works. She also has a pine tree in the town hall, being described as always having the AC on full blast, lining up with the holidays being associated with winter and the cold. We've also been given evidence that she's Asgore's landlord, as there's a note within his flower shop reading, "No rent received. Again. Stop giving away flowers, start selling them. You have 1 month. C." What the C in her name stands for is up for debate. My guess is that it's Carol, because, come on. But other people have posited stuff like Comet, Clarice, or Clara. Either way, we can infer that this is her due to the size of the Holiday residence, meaning that she probably has enough wealth to own multiple properties, along with their previous relations with the Dreamer family I'll get to. If the landlord was somebody who didn't know Asgore personally, chances are they wouldn't tolerate him not paying rent for multiple months and would have already evicted him. The reason to me that she makes sense as the knight within the story is due to her having all of the traits and narrative ingredients to be able to fit the story as the knight in a satisfying manner, in a way that's both cohesive and interesting. Let me explain. One of the focal plot threads of Deltarune is that of the Dreamer and Holiday families, and how they grew apart due to the disappearance of December. Its effects have manifested in a good few different ways throughout the story, like Chris and Noelle drifting apart, Asgore losing his job, and what made Chris so afraid of the bunker to begin with. It's underlied several of the character arcs and narratives throughout the story so far, And so it would make sense for the knight to relate to this conflict due to its similar level of importance to the story. Alongside this, she also makes sense as the knight with regard to both motivation and characterization. When December disappeared, Asgore was discharged from his position as police chief, likely due to his failure to find December or ascertain what happened to her. This is likely something only someone of Mayor Holiday's status could do, and given that it was her daughter that Asgore failed to save, she has plenty of motivation to have him fired. This shows Mayor Holiday's intense care for and vested interest in finding December, which relates to a plot that we already know will become more important as the story progresses. Find her. In the Spamton sweepstakes, we were given a page, deltarune.com/des. In it, we were given a sprite of a red guitar, with a cover of Lost Girl playing. The audio file for this is called findher.mp3. This, alongside the dialogue left in the code of the game, heavily implied to be from Des, tells us that she did not die. Rather, she disappeared. The name of the song being Find Her also lets us know that someone wants to find her, and it makes sense that one of the people in the story trying to find her would be Mayor Holiday. We know the nature of December's disappearance likely wasn't conventional, implied to take place near or at the bunker south of hometown, likely being related to the Dark Worlds and Gaster. This is because when standing near the doors, a slowed down version of mus_smile plays, the same sound that plays when you use your phone in the Dark World and when in the room for Gaster's entry number 17 in Undertale. In Chapter 2, Snowy and Monster Kid's dialogue show that Chris has a fear of the area for one reason or another, with my guess being what happened to December way back when. The unconventional manner of this disappearance mean it would need an unconventional solution. If Des disappeared into the dark, the only place to find her would be in the dark. This gives us one of the things missing from most other knight candidates in my eyes. Motivation for opening the Dark Fountains to begin with. Wanting to find her daughter, or bring about the Roaring as a method of bringing her back, is plenty understandable, lining up with the pieces of characterization we've been given of her. Not to mention the other aspects of Dark Worlds, one of the themes of which has been escapism. The fantastical nature of Dark Worlds has let them be an escape from life for the main characters, giving them release from the struggles they face in their day-to-day. Whether it's for Noelle to live in a world where problems are easier to solve, for Birdley to not need to continue life without Noelle, for Susie to have some place she calls home, and for Chris to be special, with the same accolades that their brother has. Mayor Holiday would have plenty she might want to escape from in this regard, plenty she might look to the Dark Worlds to fix. Her daughter is gone, her husband is sick and might not get better, and her only remaining child is left with only her to look after her. Spreading the influence of the Dark Worlds with the Roaring could be, in her mind, the solution she needs. A way to reunite a family, to cure their problems, to make them all happy again. A way to make the dreams of the Dark World a reality. Another piece that makes Mayor Holiday a solid knight candidate to me is the proper build-up that she's been given. Here we have a character we already know plenty about, but we've never actually seen her in the flesh. All we have is bits and pieces from other characters, painting a picture of an icy-willed authority figure with large influence on the town. We hear of her feats as mayor, her dedication to her work, and her cold temperament, but also the troubled home life of a family that she's part of. It's left us to wonder what she might be like outside the sparse details we've been given. It sparks curiosity, setting expectations for who this character might be when we finally see them. Not only that, but similarly, we've been slowly learning about the festival taking place later in the week, the one that she's organizing, one that turns the entire town into a carnival that all the characters seem like they'll be going to. It's been heavily speculated to be the location of one of the final Dark Worlds, or even the Roaring itself, and its build-up alongside the mayor herself leaves us to wonder about them in tandem. The treatment of her and her actions has been similar to the Knight, a character whose influence has driven much of the story, but one we're only left to hear small pieces about. It leads us to wonder who they are and what their motivation is. The teasing of the three almost feels intentionally linked, setting up payoffs for later in the story. It all reminds me of the original Final Fantasy VII, where Sephiroth is built up by dialogue hinting about his existence and history. He's treated very sparingly, leaving his influence to be felt through small teases to intrigue the player and to add to his mystery, before he enters the fold of the main plot by assassinating the villain the player had been fighting until then. The flashback sequence where the player finally gets to see what he looks like is iconic, and his overall slow reveal is part of what makes his character so strong and what gives him such a strong legacy. Hell, the fact that even her name is only hinted at, rather than stated in full, could lead credence to the idea that it's her if you believe the identity of the knight is meant to be a sort of mystery, one that'll slowly be uncovered as its story goes on. Most importantly though, she actually has a relationship with Chris and Noelle, two of the main characters. Like I said, one of the main plot threads in Deltarune is the relationship between the Dreamers and Holidays. And this would give two of our main characters a direct relationship with the main antagonist, laying the groundwork for both character and plot developments. This is why I have such a hard time believing it would be someone like Papyrus or Alvin, characters that have light connections to our main characters at best, and the plot as a result. Their presence as an antagonist, at least right now, would have a lot less narrative weight, especially as a sort of reveal. Many of these other knight candidates haven't been given a meaningful connection to our characters, to the town, to the conflicts and story we've been given so far. I'm not saying that this couldn't change. We have 5 out of 7 chapters to go to introduce us to so many more ideas, plots, and characters, so there's more than enough time for another candidate to be established and elaborated upon more. But at least, as it stands, I don't have much reason to see it be one of them over someone who is stake and built up in the story like Mayor Holiday. Another possible candidate for this line of reasoning is Des, following the same logic I've outlined here. She relates to the main characters and conflicts and has been built up in a similar manner, with her motivation likely being informed by whatever she learned or experienced in the bunker. In the dark. The only thing that makes me hesitate a little bit is what's likely her dialogue in the code and through Spampton, painting the picture of someone who's trapped and asking for help. It makes me lean towards the idea that she's not an active participant in the plot just yet, but she still very much has grounds to be. After all, there's so much we have yet to learn regarding her situation. So, to summarize, I find it very likely that the knight is a Holiday, either the mayor or December herself, due to them relating to the main conflicts of the story, having relevance to our characters, and being built up in narratively satisfying ways. But you might hear all of this and think that it sounds like relatively standard theory territory. I might be using a bit of a different methodology, but I'm still treading familiar ground in terms of ideation, and that's because it is. Like I said earlier, this was the option I'm leaning towards less. The reason for the title of the video is because I believe the true identity of the knight is... Chris. Yes. Is this surprising? No, it's probably the most obvious answer to the question. But, weirdly enough, it's also the one with the most people arguing against it. Chris ticks pretty much all of the boxes I've mentioned so far. They have an existing stake in the story, they have potential motivations relating to December and the Dark Fountains, they have meaningful connections to the other main characters. It's also been set up pretty decently too. We learn about the knight in Chapter 1, are given more info about them and their role in Chapter 2, left by Susie to ponder their potential motivations and morals, just before that bombshell at the end of the chapter revealing that it's likely Chris. It just flows really nicely, all things considered, especially from a writing perspective. But more than just the narrative, Chris has the meta-narrative lining up for them in this regard. Toby Fox's games have featured meta-narratives relating to their statuses as games. Saving and loading being in-universe mechanics in Undertale was a huge plot point, with themes of completionism and the nature of level grinding being themes of the No Mercy route. Deltarune has been set up to be no different in this regard. The player being a separate entity from the character they play as was a bit of a footnote in Undertale, something you figure out only after completing all of the routes. But in Deltarune, much of the game so far has centered around the fact that we and Chris are not the same. They have their own will and choices they want to make, and we have ours. Our control often overrides theirs, with them only being able to truly act on their own by separating themselves from the Red Soul, from us. One facet of Deltarune's meta-narrative thus far has asked, what happens when the player and the player character want different things? Diving deeper and deeper into that, not just by having Chris's lack of control due to our influence be part of the plot, but also by having our very interests in the story conflict. It's poignant grounds for storytelling, and frankly, it's kind of perfect for the kind of meta-stories Toby loves to tell. This can and likely will be a huge plot point in Deltarune regardless of whether or not Chris is the knight. Toby said in an interview with Yoko Shimomura that Chris will play more of a role than just a traditional hero. It's just that Chris being the knight would give a lot of extra room to explore the concept and its implications. Alongside all of this, the evidence for Chris Knight is just overwhelming, to be frank. To the point that if Chris wasn't the knight, I would have so many questions about what some of these details might mean otherwise. Here's what I mean. We're given pretty clear tells that the creation of the Dark Fountain at the end of Chapter 2 is something that Chris has done before. They had to know about Dark Worlds and how to create them before the story began. They showed levels of knowledge consistent with what the knight has done. Case in point, when you wake up in Chapter 2, you can check the TV in the house. In Chapter 1, it was unplugged, but interestingly enough, in Chapter 2, it's plugged in. This is especially interesting because we only learn about how dark fountains are made near the end of Chapter 2, and on a first playthrough, we're left to believe that Chris learned it here too. But if Chris plugged the TV in beforehand, it means they likely planned the Chapter 3 Dark Worlds ahead of time. It'd also mean that they have experience both creating and orchestrating Dark Worlds before, since they had to make sure to turn the TV on and open the door before opening the fountain, which means they know these things will affect the Dark World itself. It shows a degree of planning for the Dark World, something we see with regard to previous chapters and their respective Dark Fountains. With the Chapter 2 Dark Fountain as an example, the laptop in the library is open, specifically saying that somebody left it on. All of the computers are turned on, and the closet full of electronics is opened. For the classroom Dark Fountain, many of the games and other toys were purposefully strewn about, creating a pathway that's in line with a linear RPG. Sham saying that the knight put the king and his son into power could very well imply the same sort of organization, that Chris removed cards from the deck and put them away ahead of time, so that King would be the boss of the Dark World. This sort of orchestration of previous Dark Worlds lines up very clearly with what Chris is doing for Chapter 3, because we wouldn't know where Chris's experience with setting up and creating Dark Fountains like this would come from unless they were responsible for the previous 2 fountains. This is what I meant by the title of the video, by the way. These specific details, to me at least, coalesce into a pretty clear, if not obvious indicator that the one opening the fountains in Hometown is Chris, and that they know way more than they let on. Disregarding it is to ignore some pretty clear details provided in the game. However, like I mentioned earlier, Chris Knight is the theory that's likely had the most pushback out of any Knight candidate, with lots of arguments being made against the possibility. But if I'm being frank, most of the arguments fall a bit short. Let me run through most of them real quick to show you what I mean. Chris would have had to break into the library at night. There's no evidence of a break-in, and they wouldn't be able to move that far without the soul. While we only see them move slowly on screen, Chris is still capable of quicker movement with the soul out, as they were able to slash Toriel's tires without her being able to see who it was. We also don't know if the library would actually be locked at night. Crime in the town is practically non-existent due to the mayor, and another public building, the school, was unlocked when nobody was working the place after hours, meaning that something similar could likely apply to the library. Or, you know, Chris could just be able to pick locks. They're pretty capable off-screen, and being able to discreetly break into a library is something I wouldn't put past them. Noelle and Birdley had their books out when the fountain is sealed. The fountain would have had to be made with them already in the room. Except, neither of them have backpacks. If they were to walk into a room with a fountain in it, like when Chris and Susie did in Chapter 1, the books would inevitably be put down or dropped in some way once the 2 fell inside the dark fountain. The books aren't open, so we don't actually know if they were studying already. Alongside this, it's perfectly natural that they would go into the room. They'd just assume it was dark and try to find a light switch, the same way Chris and Susie did with the closet. It'd definitely be ominous, sure, but I doubt someone as headstrong as Bradley would turn away from his studies just because the computer lab was kind of spooky. Queen said that the Cyberworld Dark Fountain was made that day. Given that time passes when Chris is in bed, when they wake up it very well could be the next day. If Chris made the fountain at, say, 2 in the morning, it would still technically be the same day as when Bradley and Noelle go to the library. The closet said a large person could fit inside, which implies the knight made the fountain in there. While possible, the text doesn't necessarily imply anything about the knight. In all likelihood, it was just some flavor text contextualizing the Giga Queen fight and how its scale translated to the light world. It also gives us the extra detail of where Bradley was put in the weird route. Additionally, the video of the knight creating the fountain the Swatchlings were watching was likely from Queen's laptop camera, which wasn't facing the closet, though the argument could absolutely be made that there was a camera in the closet, as it was said to be full of electronics. Closet night is possible, sure, but it's by no means indisputable. The king says it's the knight's will to kill the Delta Warriors, which Chris is in. Except we don't actually know if the king was given direct orders. Like Queen in Chapter 2, King could very well just be operating on his assumptions about the knight. If the knight gifted him this glorious dark fountain and put specifically him in power over the other kings, it's pretty natural to assume that he would think that the same knight would want him to kill anyone who would try and steal the fountain. But wouldn't the Darkners recognize Chris? Not necessarily. Queen was only operating based on her assumptions about the knight's actions. We have no proof that she ever actually met them, or that any of the Darkners did in fact. The ability to influence a dark world before its creation means that the knight wouldn't have to actually enter any of the dark worlds in the first place. Queen said that the knight's hand was long, and Chris was too short to reach the arcade controls in Chapter 2. While a fair observation, I'd be lying if it didn't sound a bit nitpicky. Yes, Chris is too short to reach the arcade game, but so would pretty much anyone else. Have you seen how big Queen is compared to every other character in Deltarune and Undertale? Pretty much no other character could actually do that. To be frank, I don't think not having the same reach as someone who utterly dwarfs Papyrus would necessarily mean that their hand is short. But why would Chris want to cause the roaring? This is something we would learn about during the story, obviously. The fact that the knight is referred to as the Roaring Knight by Queen, who likely hasn't even met them, means that it's probably part of some prophecy or what have you. This is, admittedly, the strongest piece of evidence against Chris Knight in my eyes, as given the sequences where Ralsei talks to Chris outside the view of the player, alongside the fact that Ralsei said that he only just now detected the Dark Fountain when he rushed over to help Chris and Susie in Chapter 2. It means that he likely would have had to be in on Chris's knighthood and be acting as a sort of accomplice. Which might sound weird, given the fact that Ralsei was so worried about the roaring happening in the first place. But again, these are motivations and reasoning that could be elaborated on as the story moves forward. Perhaps it needs to occur in a specific spot or in a specific way for the prophecy to occur as it's supposed to, that Ralsei wants to abide by, or simply there's more to all of this than Ralsei lets on. The scrapped animated opening for the game would have shown the Delta Warriors running upstairs towards the knight. Wouldn't that be impossible if Chris was also the knight? Not necessarily. It can often be a common trope for a character to face themselves, or openings like these are often abstract, lending themselves well to symbolism. And this aspect could work very well for Chris being the knight, given the split of when we're controlling them and when they're acting on their own by forcing us out. And lastly, it gets rid of the mystery too early, or it would be boring. A common objection I see to Chris being the knight is that it would be too simple of an answer. That the knight's identity is supposed to be a big mystery, a whodunit, one we still don't have the answer to. So, to these people, the end of Chapter 2 implying that Chris is the knight is too obvious, too easy. It's supposed to be 4D chess after all, why would it be spoiled so early? But that's the thing, it doesn't necessarily need to be a big mystery. It's putting the cart before the horse, assuming that to function well in the narrative, the knight must be a mystery. Not just to the other characters, but specifically to us, the player. But is that necessary? The story very well could direct its focus onto the ramifications of Chris being the knight, and how that impacts their friends, their town, and us, rather than just us discovering the identity of the knight. Us being the only ones who actually know that Chris is the knight would add a whole extra layer to the story. We might know the identity of the knight, but we only operate under the pretenses the game gives us. We can't sound the alarm to the other characters. Quite importantly, all of this isn't even to say that Chris would be an outright villain in this scenario. There's the idea that, because the knight is assumed to be a villain, Chris would inevitably be recharacterized as evil. But I think that's doing both the concept and Toby's writing a huge disservice. Just because their will opposes ours doesn't necessarily mean that they're acting as the knight out of malice. After all, in the Gonnermaker sequence, Gaster refers to Chris as someone very, very wonderful, the same way he does for Susie and Noelle. The question of why they're doing what they are and why they're orchestrating the Dark Worlds in that way, that could be the mystery left for the player. Toby's narratives are full of moral grayness and complexity. Even a literal, soulless, emotionless killer like Flowey is given reasons for why they do what they do, and a complex story that the player is left to empathize with. Given that Chris is the main character of the game, I don't doubt that they would be afforded the same emotional complexity with their storyline, even if they're acting against the party in secret. A mystery doesn't necessarily need to have its answer hidden from the viewer for it to still be a great part of the story. Oftentimes, it's just as satisfying watching the other characters put the pieces together. Overall, I think that viewing Chris Knight as a sort of letdown from some big mystery is, again, doing the story that Toby might be trying to tell here a huge disservice, especially given how much depth could be mined from the concept. In the end, I'm left to wonder, why do people think this question will have such a complex answer? I think, to an extent, it's the way for future chapters getting to people, and I can't exactly blame them. There's a potent desire, when given a sizable weight for new content, for the answer to a question to be more complicated than it actually is, that there's one big central mystery we still need to figure out. Don't get me wrong, the game does treat it like one, at least for the first 2 chapters. We're left to wonder who this character might be, and all things considered, it makes for a pretty interesting mystery. It's understandable to want it to still be one too, to not want the potential answer we've been given to be true, because it might mean we won't have that specific mystery to mull over to keep us busy. Even if Chris makes more sense than most of the candidates on a lot of different levels, for some people that could just be hard to accept. There's lots of questions I'm eager to have answered when future chapters come out, and the ending of this chapter really does still lead us to wonder if Chris is the knight. But I'm unsure if this is meant to be the giant mystery some in the fandom hype it up to be. None of this is to say that it's a bad thing to want it to be a mystery or to keep theorizing about it in the most wild ways possible, even in ways that don't even make sense, like positing Elphys or Pizza Pants as the ultimate villain. Theorizing is a huge part of fandom, and it's fun seeing all these different ideas. It's not to say that any of these ideas would be bad writing, or that it would be bad for them to be the case. We're 2/7 through the story. Toby would have plenty of time to work his magic and turn any potential character into a narratively deep fan favorite. I have faith that he could make literally any character work in the role. Again, I don't think it's impossible that another character is the knight. Like I said, if it's someone other than Chris, I'm fairly confident it's a Holiday. It's an angle that could still work wonderfully for the story and is still worth speculating on. It's more so that other times, I feel that plenty of theories miss the forest for the trees, focusing on small details and scraps rather than doing narrative and thematic analysis. The former is incredibly fun, don't get me wrong, but I think that the latter is criminally underrated as a form of theorization within fandom. So many details can be recontextualized when you change the angle that you're seeing it from, and inform a lot of ideas you could see happening or your interpretation of the story so far. If Chris is the knight, that makes so many fascinating ideas, plot threads, and dynamics open up for the story. I think theorizing about that is just as worthwhile as questioning the identity of the knight itself. If there's any takeaway I want there to be from this, it's that looking at different levels of a work when coming up with ideas or theories like this is wonderful, and that you should try it more. And hey, sometimes it might just get you closer to the truth than you might think.